In this video, I'm going to encourage you to treat your partner, or perhaps another person, like a child. What on earth do I mean by that? Hey everyone, I'm Sonia, and on this channel I give you content, tips, and strategies to help you with your relationships, to help you with attachment style healing, and to help you live your most fulfilling life overall. So what do I mean by that, treating someone else like a child? I mean, that sounds negative, but I do mean it in a particular way that I think will be of value to you. So why treat someone like a child? And when I say treat, I guess I really do mean interact with them like a child. So maybe the phrase treat them like a child goes a little too far, in the sense that we have connotations around that imply things that maybe we shouldn't treat children like that we're not respecting them as much as an adult, or that we're, being different with them in some way that is kind of negative. I don't think it has to be negative. We do have different configurations sometimes with children, but it does have that negative connotation. So let's call it from here on out interacting with someone like they're a child. So why would they be like a child? Well, we all carry that inner child with us, right? We're kind of all the ages we've ever been up to now are still there in us somewhere too, because we've had all those experiences, we've been that person. And so even when we've grown, we have sort of like flavors of ourselves or ways that we come out that sometimes are more like one of the other ages we've ever been. And sometimes that's extra true for a particular difficult time that we had in childhood. That one might have made more of an imprint, maybe because there was something we didn't get when we were that age, or, there was more of a trauma at that age. And so that one is sort of extra liable to come out. And so there could be a particular age, especially of inner child, that does show up a lot for us. And the other things I want to say about that is that we can have that particular inner child in us activated at a particular time. You might imagine that if it's triggered by a particular kind of thing in our lives, like suddenly we are feeling reminded of something, whether it's subconscious or not, from that period in our childhood, that could be like why that inner child comes up right then. Maybe we're just feeling more vulnerability around a certain area that reminds us of that stage in childhood. So for many reasons, a particular inner child of ours could be activated. And so speaking of it again as like, let's say we could really be any other person, but we're in relationship with, or even not, right? It could be just someone's inner child being activated who we're briefly interacting with. But let's talk about it in terms of a partner here. So there can be a time when their inner child is more activated, and it's just that is who we're talking to at that given time. And then the other important point I wanted to make about people carrying their inner child with them and about your partner at a given time possibly, acting and speaking to you as that inner child, is that they probably won't have conscious awareness of that. And they also won't have access as much to their adult self during those times. So with all of that set in place, that we do carry our inner children with us, all of us, and you might be interacting with someone like your partner, and they have that particular inner child activated for whatever reason, and they might not be aware of it themselves, very unlikely to be aware of it themselves, and they don't have access to their adult at that time, their adult self as much. Well, so what are the advantages? Why, maybe our impulse is to be like, oh, stop acting like a child, or like our impulse is to point that out to them, or it is to try to bring their adult self forward. So those are pretty difficult to do. Like I said, people don't necessarily have access to their adult self, so they can't just pull themselves back into their adult self so easily. And so I want to make the point here, though, that recognizing that and realizing that sometimes we're talking to someone's inner child is actually very helpful. So what are the advantages? And let me make a caveat here that when we are interacting with someone as their inner child, that does not mean at all that we don't still have boundaries with them, that we are not still doing self-advocacy and going to, self-advocate for whatever the conversation's around. And it doesn't mean we're actually in that configuration, right? We're not actually in that configuration like a parent and a child, and how the responsibilities are different in the conversation. What it means is the awareness of it and the approach, though. The approach might be different. So one advantage to treating your partner, really interacting with them as a child, if that's what you're noticing, is that their inner child seems to be up, is simply compassion. So that awareness that that's where they're at can alleviate that desire to kind of force them to get on the same page with us if we realize that that inner child is activated. It also feels compassionate because when you see someone's inner child, I mean, it's just, you can't help but be more compassionate towards them because we do feel often more that way for children. And so it's helpful actually for getting into a compassionate state to see that in someone. In fact, I would recommend, even if you're not noticing a partner particularly being reactive and in their inner child state, but let's say you're just having a vulnerable conversation, just being aware that they have that inner child in them can help you with your compassion in the situation. So I even recommend seeing it to some extent, the inner child in your partner, even when it's not particularly up and activated. So the number two reason why it can be an advantage to recognize that your partner's that your partner or someone else's inner child is up, and that that's who you're speaking or interacting with, is that you can really consider if it's the appropriate time to be having the discussion or interaction that you're having. So, for example, if your partner's inner child is up who's feeling very resistant, let's say their rebellious teen is up, maybe that's not the right time to have the conversation about things that you're hoping to get, to get them on the same page about doing. If they're just suddenly up in that way and it's feeling forced to them, I mean, you can certainly try, and there are techniques for that more of my other videos, talk about things like that. But it's also could be the clue that just that's not the right time. Whether you want to think of that as reactivity in general, that's also, you could also think of it that way. But in this case, we're thinking of it as that inner child. And so if you notice that inner child is up, that can be your clue that it's not the right time. A third reason why it can actually be really helpful to recognize and interact with your partner's inner child who is up and activated is that sometimes you can actually give that inner child what it wants. Like if you recognize that it's an inner child and you can tell that your partner, for example, is seeming to want soothing, that not only does the compassion of that maybe come up more instead of feeling like, oh, can't we just have this conversation? So not only will our compassion be higher for giving our partner what they want if we're seeing that inner child, but we just might be more likely to notice and hone in on kind of the level, almost what they want and the level of it if we're seeing it that way. So if we're seeing that an adult wants soothing, we might not do it to like the same extent or in the same way that we might do it if we sort of see it as that inner child. If we see that inner child's there and wanting soothing, we might actually realize there's a way we can do that that is really nice and soothing to that person. And again, that's totally fine to do that. That doesn't have to mean self-abandoning what we are trying to advocate for in a particular conversation. It's more around approach and how we're interacting with the person. So sometimes we can give that inner child what it wants. And this kind of leads into the fourth reason that it can be an advantage to interact with someone's inner child that is up, that we notice is up and activated. So that is just simply that we can deal with them more effectively, perhaps, if we're seeing things from that perspective of an inner child. I just gave the example of giving an inner child what it wants through something like soothing, but maybe it's just in a different way. Like maybe maybe we actually explain the thing that we're trying to explain a little more, laid out and clearly like we would to a child, because we can see that they're just in a different state about it, our partner, whoever we're talking to. And we have the sense that that's needed, that there's some confusion around it. Maybe it's better anyway to say things more clearly, or whatever it is that we are inspired to do differently in our interaction with the person because we see that that inner child's up. So it really is about sort of using that information. It's really the awareness, but that information and awareness of what we're seeing in the other person when we're seeing that inner child that's up just to strategize about how best to interact with them. If you think of an actual child who you would interact with at that age, that could actually be really helpful. And of course, I hope it goes without saying that I'm not talking about the kind of thing where people say, oh, grow up. And, that kind of thing where people are like, oh, they're not talking about someone's inner child, but they're trying to imply that someone's immature, or they're trying to, make it this really negative thing with their partner. We're not talking about that at all. Like, this is actually honoring this part of someone who has been that age and who maybe has that age activated for some reason, and hopefully we can think of it as, like I said, when you're thinking of an actual child, like hopefully we can think of like a respectful relationship with a child who'd be that age if we're considering it. Not like we're thinking less of them because they're younger or because they're in a different stage of life. And that leads to a final point I want to just make, which is that it's not all bad that we have these inner children that get activated and that come up. I mean, in a lot of ways, I wonder if it's our inner child that is up sometimes when we're sharing the most vulnerably, for example, like at least a piece of ourselves might be up that is that sort of like open and trusting child that's going to share vulnerably. So I think that we can think of these inner children. I mean, sure, sometimes they can cause some troubles for the way our adult selves want things to go. And it can feel sometimes frustrating if we're trying to talk to someone in a certain way, as, in a more of an adult way, and their inner child's up. But if we can also remember that there are aspects of that that are beautiful and wonderful, like the vulnerability aspect potentially, and that we can remember that there are advantages as long as we're aware that the inner child is up and we're willing to strategize and, actually acknowledge that and the truth of it and, go from there, then I think it can actually be a wonderful thing, which is good because we do all have this, and that's also important to remember. So you've got one too. You've got maybe more than one, right? If we have different ages we're considering. So we all have the inner children. And so, of course, that can just lead back to how would we want someone to respond to our inner child when it's up. So hopefully you found this content useful. I would love it if you would like and subscribe so we can get the content spread around if this content resonated for you. I'd love to hear any comments you have or thoughts on this. Like, have you noticed dealing with someone else and you did have that awareness, like, whoa, this is like a child I'm talking to. This must be their inner child that's up. Has that happened to you? And I do have an occasional newsletter that I have started. And so if you'd like to get on that, go ahead and check out the description box below. I'm also open for one-on-one coaching at this point, so you can also check out that in the description box below. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all the work you're doing on your personal growth and development so that we can all have more fulfilling lives and also spread that through our interactions with others in the world.